Okay, I believe the stream is transferred over. YouTube, can you hear us? Sometimes there's lag on YouTube, but we'll get started. They'll tell us if they can hear us soon. Okay, thank you everyone. It's been, okay, they can hear us. A while, we had DevCon, we had a lot of stuff going on there. We had the Eth2.0 workshop day, which I think went really well, and we can talk about that a little bit when we get to it. First, we have a lot of clients these days, but let's go through quickly what's been going on with the clients that are working on this, and we'll go from there. Who wants to get started?
Well, we can start. We're Lighthouse.
Great.
So we've been regaining momentum after DevCon. We've been focusing on onboarding and expanding the team. As a result, we've got Alex Stokes, who's joined. He was a contributor to Casper, really smart guy, really excited to have him around. We've been working on Rust lib P2P. We're going to start focusing on state transition logic. I saw it just changed. We're going to be focusing on fork choice too. And one of our security guys has been working to point the AFL fuzzing library at our SSZ implementation so we can see if we can break it. That's about it from us on our end.
Cool, thanks. How about Nimbus? Nimbus? Okay, anyone from Nimbus? We can move on. Let's go to Harmony.
We've been finished with attestations and now working on BLS and finality. Regarding BLS, we decided to start from Milagro to evaluate it and decide on whether it's enough, whether it's sufficient for us at the moment or not, and maybe do some experiments and some tries to implement, to get a custom implementation of BLS. That's all from us for now.
Cool. How about Pegasus?
It's Ben here. So nothing to report on the client development front. We've all been away for a couple of weeks, but hope to bring more substantial news for the next meeting. I don't know, are you taking research updates now, Danny? Nicola could probably give you a brief update on that front.
Yeah, why not?
Main points, we continue to work on the network part. I will add some comments actually on the GitHub that was created a while ago, I think by Carl, for follow-up on the conversation. And we continue to work on the simulator as well. And we plan to present it widely next 2 weeks or in 2 weeks. And that's it for the research.
Great, thanks. How about...
Can I just chime in with a question on that simulator?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I wonder if it's relevant for the needs we have on ETH 1.0 as well.
It's very generic. We used it, for example, to implement Definity. So it could be used for 1.0 as well. I can send you the link. The source is public, so I can send you the link right now, and we'll have more documentation in the next 2 weeks.
So, cool, awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I know people were really interested in the weight block platform during DevCon for a number of reasons, and they did end up they either open sourced or have decided they're going to open source. So that's another good simulation tool I think out there. Cool. Thanks, Pegasus. How about Prismatic?
Yeah, this is Terrence from Prismatic. Just a quick update. We've been following pretty closely with the Spec, and we're working towards transition between crystallized state, active state into a single state. So we're working towards that. We've done some work. It's by this as Stability employee. It's called Rumi. And then we're implementing a Go wrapper for BLS 12381. So I also want to make people aware of the Rumi repo. It has been really great. It has Python, but it has Python bindings as well. And we have done some work on the P2P end. We have implemented the boot node. So right now we're working on testing on that. And then we plan to work on the relay node next. And that's pretty much it.
What was the BLS library that you've enjoyed using?
It's called Harumi. I'm posting the link.
Okay, cool. Great, thank you. Xiaowei, do you want to give an update on PyEVM stuff?
Okay, sure. So not much progress after from Python side. We were having vacations after DevCon. So in the incoming weeks, I will isolate the Trinity client implementation with Danny, and I can write a bounty code for the simple serialize in Python implementation, which will make it to be a more production version. And the third thing is that sorting out the version of the Spec for the Trinity testnet. We hope that could be built in the end of this year. Yeah, that's the Python side update. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, Xiaowei and I are gonna work through all the changes in the spec in PyEVM pretty soon, and expect a lot of like minor bugs fixes around that. Okay.
Yeah, hi. Let's see if you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Jacek.
Nimbus.
Yeah, Jacek from Nimbus. Sorry about that. So I'll just give a brief update. There's a couple of things going on from the Nimbus side. One is that we're hoping to contribute a little bit more to the easy to understand explaining guides. We started a repository where we'll be publishing a few tutorials. One is already out on validators. There's another one coming up on the beacon chain and so on. And we encourage everybody to join us in those reviews. There's a repo posted. I'll put a link in the chat later on. Other than that, we've been focusing on the light client working groups, investigating how to approach light clients in a secure fashion while gaining while learning some of the lessons from Eth2.0. So there's a working group for that going, as well as the testing group, which is making progress. So likewise, there's a channel for discussing testing. Yeah, and then looking into small bits and pieces like progress on the libp2p daemon side, the tree hashing functions. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Thank you. How about ChainSafe?
So after DevCon, we've been refocusing and regrouping the project. So internally, there's been more interest since people have been asking about it. So this weekend, we're going to be holding another internal hackathon to have people work on it. We're going to focus more on turning our implementation into more of a light client. and have it plug in with the current dev tools for the Ethereum JavaScript ecosystem. And that's it in terms of an update.
Cool. Thank you. Parity?
Not much of an update to give. We're looking into the details of the spec, trying to dive in a little bit again, and looking to add more people on it in the near-term future so we can start building stuff out again.
Cool. And y'all are thinking about using, it's looking like you might use Substrate.
That's still the plan, and we don't see any reasons why we couldn't right now. So I'm still hopeful, but not going to promise that it will be, but I'm hopeful. We'll get to a point later that it's sort of, yeah, it's on the agenda, so I'll speak up then as well.
Cool, cool. And we have some people from Geth here today. Anything you want to chime in on?
For now, we're mostly just listening in and trying to get up to speed. So nothing really to report.
Great, thanks. Is there any team that I missed? Speak up if so. Okay, cool. Research updates. We got a little bit of research updates from the Pegasus side. Anything else from anyone at this point? Cool. I guess a lot of stuff has just been refining the spec. If you've been following, we recently pulled out Phase 0 and Phase 1 as two separate documents, in which Phase 0, now that we've unified the state and made a few other changes, we expect it to be really solidifying in the coming weeks as we work through just more of the minor details, bug fixes, etc. The Phase 1 document is still definitely up for lots of changes. We just kind of have the bones in place, but if you want to check it out, the Phase 1 is the adding of the data chains, the shard chains. So if you want to check that out and start internalizing it and contributing, please take a look. I know a lot of focus and conversation is going to be on state execution now that the Phase 0 stuff and the Phase 1 stuff is getting there. Cool. Next thing on the agenda. So the working group follow-up, we had a working group workshop meetup the day before DEF CON. I think it was generally pretty productive, and there was a decent amount of education, some decent progress, and I think Justin might have some updates for us soon. But working groups, there is a link I shared in the that has some of the follow-up notes. I don't want to go through everything today. Mainly want to say some of these I know I don't know where I got cut out. Mami, you were giving us an update about testing?
Yes, so I'm adding a pull request on the chat, and feel free to comment and collaborate on our next steps.
Great.
Danny, I've got a quick one.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Lane. So the sort of working session that I participated in at the Eth2.0 meetup was broadly about things like project management and coordination. There was a pretty strong consensus in that conversation that sort of a PM or a coordinator using like a coordinator type role would be really helpful for managing in particular the ETH1.x roadmap. And so just wanted to report, as you know, Danny, there's been some progress there. We've got a call lined up next week with Hudson and a number of people on the order of 7 or 8 people who have expressed interest in helping out with that role. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to recruit one or more of them in the near term. And Danny, I think you said that that's probably not going to be a thing for the 2.0 roadmap for the time being, but we are moving forward with it for the 1.x roadmap.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not opposed to it, and I think it will have a place here. I just don't think we're quite there, and it can play out just in the 1.0 before we figure out best practices and import it into this process.
Yeah, totally agree. And hopefully people who participate in the 1.0 roadmap would be able to help out with 2.0 stuff in the longer term as well.
Nice. Quick update from Justin. He's been plugging ahead on his VDF randomness research. The estimate is down from 20 to 30 million to less than 20 million. Initial discussions with Tezos on collaborating. It just seems like more and more teams are realizing that this is a pretty viable use case, and so people are interested in collaborating on the research and the production if we go down that path. I'm going to not dig into this security research, but he has some updates on security research, and he's going to do an ETH research post on a deep dive on the various cryptographic and hardware assumptions. Oh, he talked to me a little bit about this. There's an effective AMAX where AMAX, which is the assumed attacker advantage, he actually realizes the effective AMAX is much lower, and that it takes 1 in a million chance for attacker controlling 2/3 of the slots to bias 1 bit. Progress in multi-party computation, another VDF day in February, and you can read that yourself. All right, cool. Thank you, Justin. I'm sorry that your mic isn't working. Any other follow-ups from the workday? One interesting thing, I think Vitalik and Al from Web3 realized that just fork choice rules based upon justification have just kind of this inherent flip-flop issue. And there's an ETH research post that I linked to, I'll link to it here, that proposes ways to make LMD ghosts in the context of justified epochs, or the justified blocks, stickier.
Of having like multiple validators on one beacon node, needing multiple shards, and then that OC constraint. So, any comments on that?
I think, and we need to do a little bit of testing on this, but the expectation is that multiple shards should be able to run in the context of a standard computer, not hundreds, but 3, 5, 8. So presumably one validator client piece of software could talk to one node that has a beacon node and multiple shards. But because the validator client software would be talking via RPC to a node, it could talk to multiple nodes, and it could one node could sync shards 3, 5, and 6. Another node could sync shards 10 and 11, depending on the architecture there. So yes, the shards live in the same client node software as the beacon node, because I think that just inherently makes sense. But if we design the API appropriately, the validator software could talk to multiple Eth2.0 nodes and tell each one which shards to sync.
Sure,
Does
thanks.
that make some sense?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just having some troubles with it. I might have to come back to this.
Okay, yeah, and we can talk about it more. That's something I want to focus on a lot, is kind of defining that minimal interface between validator software and a node. So we can talk about it more offline.
Yeah, the solution that that kind of came to mind for me was that the beacon node would be kind of like a manager that would connect to, like, via another RPC to multiple shard clients, so that like it kind of does the load balancing as opposed to the validator client having to kind of like load balance between these multiple between these multiple beacon nodes where it doesn't really know their capacity and stuff like this. So maybe we can follow up on that.
Yeah, that might be a reasonable separation of concerns. But yeah, we can talk about it more later.
Sure.
I had a question regarding the architecture, which is basically how much of this do we want to put in the spec or enforce as an implementation requirement? I'm thinking here that for some clients and use cases, it might be reasonable to use a different constellation of
Yeah, I 100% agree.
actors.
I think that one distinct goal that I have is to define an API such that a piece of validator software can be cleanly pulled out of a node, or at least a node that does implement this interface. Not that maybe Nimbus would need to, if Nimbus is targeting like embedded software and maybe isn't even targeting validators. But I want, I imagine a node often might ship with a built-in validation piece of software, but the we want to keep the separations clean such that somebody else can write a different validation piece of software, so we can have kind of diverse setups and people can write pooling software easily and everything, rather than having them super tightly coupled. And this is kind of akin to the RPC methods in Eth2.0. And not, although it would be best if everyone did conform to those standards, not everyone conforms to the exact standards. You could definitely have a node that didn't necessarily implement those standards and still follow the protocol.
One thing. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. You didn't
Oh,
finish.
I was just saying, but in terms of the more subtle components of like separating a beacon node and the shard nodes internally, that's definitely getting into like the client specific territory that doesn't really need to be defined in the spec, I don't think.
One of the outcome of the DOS attacks group was having things in spec is good, and maybe we should have like a implementer best practice, so a kind of manual that says that this is implementation detail, but this is what we recommend, and if you deviate from that, have a good reason, like embedded devices or things like this.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable for a lot of it. And in terms of internal architecture, I don't think I necessarily want to go down that road, but I understand in terms of DOS attack analysis, like the order in which you process things and strategies for throwing out blocks. I think that those should definitely be in like a common repository and source of knowledge.
Circling back to the client architecture, another thing that's worth talking about is how should a validator manage private and public key? I think that's something that we should probably write down within the working group as well, so that people know what's the best security practice.
Right. I kind of follow Piper's philosophy on that, in that I don't think that a node should really be managing keys, and that the layer outside should definitely. But in terms of best practices of how the client should, it's a great question. There's all sorts of interesting things that you can do in terms of embedding keys and secure pieces of hardware and things like that. But I agree. It's reasonable to cite best practices there, or at least the options there.
Another question: if the beacon nodes are storing the shard data, is there an expectation then that the validator clients also store provided custody bits for?
Sorry, you cut out. That validators do what?
Is there an expectation that the validators store a copy of the data for which they're signing or for which they're providing custody bits for?
Good question. Justin says yes. Yes, you definitely need to store a copy of the data. With respect to the separation of concerns, I believe that the client, the validator client, rather than the node, should be responsible for this, because the idea would be that if you turned your validator client off and swapped out a different node underneath the hood, the validator client should know everything it needs to run with this new node software underneath. So if it needed to know that extra storage, then it needs to store with the validator rather than in the node. Justin says they can rely on external storage, but that would also be taking on counterparty risk. But in general, yeah, it's anything that the validator needs to do to continue to do their job, like remember what messages they've signed, remember the storage, the storage that they've proven they have custody of, that would all live ideally in a that would all live ideally in the validator piece of software rather than embedded in the node. Cool. Any other follow-ups from that meeting, workshop?
I think something that I wanted to mention too, that we were in the I think it was the wire protocol and node discovery. Something that we were talking about a lot was the ability for a client or a validator to be able to hide on the network, to be able to kind of obscure that it is a validator. I know that there was work on the aggregation scheme, and I'm not sure how that affects the ability for a validator to hide. I think it would be ideal if it could, but we have to there might be some cases where it just makes it impossible. So that's maybe something to consider.
Nicola or Carl, the schemes that y'all were discussing, do any of them have issues with anonymity?
Not hugely from what I'm aware of. You always have the issue where the first person has to generate the data, so you're always aware of who the first person is before you start aggregating. You have to aggregate anonymity at that point.
Right, but even when you receive data, you don't necessarily know who you received it from. Or sorry, you know who you received it from network level, but you don't know that they produced it. You just know that you received it from them first, right?
Yes, definitely. But yeah, sure.
Right. What about? I know the assessment was generally that the naive aggregation strategies, given the expected network load, will likely work. Were any of the more sophisticated aggregation techniques, like the tree structures, do those require the loss of anonymity, Nicola?
Yeah. So on the fact that the naive implementation work, it's at the limit. It depends on the number of shards that you have on a single computer. So it's really at the limit. In terms of, if you use the tree-based logic, then you need to be identified as a participant in the aggregation protocol. You can be participating without telling where the aggregation comes from, and where you don't have to say where the signature comes from, but you have to be identified as a participant.
I see.
Is that like your like peer-to-peer public key is identified as a participant?
Yes, but you can have a kind of specific key just for participating. It can be different, if you like, from the one that is going to sign.
Sure.
Okay, just the idea is that you have a role in the, you have a place in the tree, and this place depends on something that needs to be known. So that's your kind of identity.
Okay, but your network level in that type of tree structure, your network level identity that can be distinct from your
It can, yes, it can.
validator identity.
Yes, it can. The question is what's the incentive to participate in the protocol? So if we say that we have people who will be participating like this without any strong incentive, then we can have any identity for that.
Right. But it does out you as a validator.
Yes, likely. I mean, if you do it simply, yes. Or you can do things more complicated, like people agreeing that they will be participating without saying that they're actual validator. And for example, they can aggregate for a shard without being validator for this shard.
Right. But likely without bringing in some sort of alternative incentivization, I don't see just user nodes participating in the protocol.
Yeah, but the point anyway, I think that hiding that you're a validator is likely to be quite difficult, whatever the protocol, because for example, if someone listens to the network, he will discover who is going to validate on a shard because a node will appear at a certain point. From the projections that we did, we had 200 nodes plus or including 300 validators. So it means that on the shards, most of the nodes will be validators anyway. So I believe that trying to hide that you're a validator is going to be difficult in practice.
Good to know. Thanks.
Okay. I think potentially the best we can do is to ensure that your network level identifiers aren't really who you are in the P2P network is not inherently tied to your validator, such that yes, you could probably de-anonymize most, but people can have at least a chance for more sophisticated setups, running multiple nodes, etc., depending on their security concerns.
Yeah, I think that's possible.
Yeah, at least we can try and make it difficult, right? Like it's probably, I know in the present F, you can pretty much pinpoint where transactions came from. So we're always going to be open to that kind of attack, but maybe it would be nice if we didn't have like some easy to find table of who is a validator because they're aggregating. So I guess we'll just do the best we can.
This is also something that's definitely helped by the separation of beacon nodes and validator clients, because you can, as validator client, just switch beacon nodes if you discover this to be a problem, or have a backup beacon node.
Yeah, or run 3 at once and do different things for each one of them to obfuscate yourself. Okay. Anything other follow-up from the workshop day? Great. I just shared a link in the chat. We don't need to go through this all today, but I just wanted to point it out that Raul and Kevin defined really the minimal libp2p implementation. As it came to my attention, libp2p is a ton of stuff, and you get to pick and choose what makes sense for you. So this is in an effort to help people who are beginning to work on the P2P implementations to narrow the scope of what they actually need to work on. And I'm sure if you have questions about that, Raul or Raul from Protocol Labs or Kevin can help you parse it, understand it. Any questions on that before we move on?
I just want to say that I appreciate the effort, really. Very helpful.
Great. Okay, cool. So the next thing is a proposal to use simple serialize for consensus only. This is something that was brought up by Alexi in the past for a number of reasons and has recently been brought up again. And so it seems like it's not done. We're not done debating it. I think one of the motivations especially was that now that we're going to move towards this tree hashing algorithm for the state, that some of the presumed benefits are no longer there. Does anybody want to champion this? I know Utaro wrote the issue, so I think he probably feels most strongly about this, but I know a number of you have taken a look. Any immediate thoughts on that?
I commented in the issue. I'm not. I can see like how it might make hashing faster by getting rid of the length bytes. Somebody made a point, I think it was Mikhail, in there about that we don't actually use the length bytes in the tree hashing. I haven't implemented it yet, so maybe that's something I'm overlooking. But I'm not personally. I'm not convinced without seeing like some sort of like benchmarks or data that it is actually a problem. So I know the spec is we're trying to avoid like this crazy optimization and trying to lean towards, sorry, not saying that was crazy, but we're trying to avoid heavy optimization and we're trying to lean towards simplicity. So I'd like to see like some indication that this is actually going to give us significant benefits before we bring in the complexity of adding in like bringing in protobuf into the spec. Because another point I made was that I don't think that by shrinking down SSZ and then using protobuf, I don't think we make the spec less complicated. I think we make it more complicated because, in my opinion, we then basically do an import of all of protobuf into our spec, and we end up with what is it like? End up with two encoders and one decoder. So they're kind of my thoughts on it at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess I want to attack this question in twofold. One, does SSC not serve our purposes for the protocol serialization, and should we be looking into an alternative? And then two, what should that alternative be? I don't particularly want to take on the complexity. I know some people really like protobuf. I don't particularly want to bring in a third-party serialization algorithm. My general feeling on that is that we do bring in a large amount of complexity by taking in somebody's serialization algorithm that's going to have versioning and updates and libraries and et cetera, et cetera. But so the first question, does SSZ not serve our purposes for the networking serialization? I'm not fully convinced of that. Does anybody think that it does not?
Is Alexi on this call?
No, and I think he has probably the strongest arguments for it. I'm cool. It seems like we don't have a ton to say about it right now. I think maybe we'll leave the issue. We can have the conversation in the issue for the next couple of weeks, and if it comes to a head, we can talk about it next call.
Yeah, sure. Just I spoke to Alexi like in a personal conversation, and he mentioned that he doesn't feel so strongly about it anymore. I'm not sure whether I'm not sure whether I'm misinterpreting or not, but that might be just an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, I would add that with FreeSSZ, we've already separated out the consensus part, which is a good thing, I think, to let the two be developed separately, and later on, if we find that they're sufficient, whatever we come up with is sufficiently similar, then they can be rejoined as well. But attacking the problem and making the best, like not doing too many trade-offs to reach like a single poor solution is a better approach in my deal, in my world. The other thing is that I totally believe that it's appropriate with a custom serialization algorithm for Ethereum, given that we're not prone to change and the software will be running for enough of a time with enough many nodes involved that it's well worth the implementation effort.
Do you believe that we're on a trajectory such that we have one solution that does not really solve the problems very well, or do you just want to keep that in mind as we move forward?
Well, we've already split out from that with TreeSSZ, right? And then there are like minor things to TreeSSZ and minor things to SSZ as well that we could debate. I think I mentioned in the chat one of them was Little Endian versus Big Endian. There are these little details where you could say optimize either of SSZ and TreeSSZ. But yeah, I don't want to take up too much time on the call with these things, I think. It's the general approach of keeping concerns apart that I think are good.
Something that I wanted to add a note on that I was saying earlier was we had some internal conversation about SSZ, and if it switched to Little Endian, it's basically what we already have implemented for Polkadot, and it seems to serve our purposes pretty well, just as a point of reference.
I really don't like that.
Cool. That's good to know. Are y'all using a tree version of the of that serialization algorithm for your state roots, or have you taken a look at that?
I can't really answer super deep details, but I don't think so.
Okay, cool.
There's a Rust crate and a repo for it. It's called let me link it. I'll find it and link it.
Cool.
I think maybe Alexei's main critique was that for the consensus, it would be nice if we could have an algorithm that can be streamed, so that we avoid the need for a huge in-memory buffer during this processing step. And that's maybe some. I haven't really analyzed TreeSSZ that deep, whether it fits that criteria, but that might be an interesting property to look at.
Okay.
He detailed all his argument on the Bitcoin chain repo, if I remember correctly. So, well, there are like 3 issues open on that, and the conversation is a bit everywhere, but his position is there.
Okay, maybe I'll digest what the original position was and put it into the new issue. We can discuss there. Okay, well then, not ready to make any sweeping changes on that. I think SSZ is a good place to continue forward on, but open to optimizations or alternatives depending on what we uncover in conversation. Great.
Apologies for my faux pas there.
What faux pas? Oh. Cool.
Having some internet issues.
Yeah, I'm surprised my calls only dropped once. My internet's terrible here. Okay. Big versus Little Endian. We don't need to have this debate, but Jacek just wanted to point out that there are potentially some benefits to move to Little Endian instead of Big Endian. Do you want to speak to that just briefly and gauge the temperature, Jacek?
Yeah, it's mostly. Again, it's a small idea, so not too much time to talk about it. But hardware today basically all the commodity hardware uses little endian. Modern serialization formats like flat buffers and those tend to favor little endian for this reason, because then you can you're just better mechanically aligned with the software and the hardware. I guess there's a consistency argument for using big endian on network protocols for historical reasons. And yeah, just having to write the Endianness code, like using big endian forces you to write the Endianness code on all those platforms that use little endians. I guess that's there's a correctness argument to be had there, but it's pretty weak. So I can write up a proposal if nobody's against it, and then like clearly against it, and then we can just pass it through.
I don't go one way or another, but if most of the hash functions are using big endian as well, so we have a lot of hash functions in Eth2.0, so that's also one thing at play.
Well, hash functions are really byte arrays. They're not endian that way.
Yeah, true. But for integers.
Okay, cool. Write up the proposal and we can discuss it. It doesn't seem super controversial to me.
All right,
cool.
Can do.
Okay, general spec discussion. Like I said at the beginning of this call, we've been talking about these phases: phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase whatever. And now we're moving towards having a clear delineation in the spec as to these phases. And the idea is that a phase n is dependent upon all the phases less than n. And that all the phases less than n can be built without having to think about phase n. Right now, that's just the beacon chain kind of internally is phase 0, and then these shard data chains on the outside of that. From the next layer would be state execution and other fun things. We've unified the state into a single state root because we're using this tree hashing algorithm such that when per block changes happen, most of the state doesn't change, and so most of the tree hash will not have to be rehashed. This is an effort for simplicity and also allows us to serve components of the tree easily to the light clients. Again, I think I've made this pretty clear. The phase 0 stuff, we're trying to get all of the big changes in now, which most of them are in now, such that people can really dig in and target that phase 0. Cool. Any questions, comments, thoughts regarding the specification at this point? Great. As you see, you can take that conversation to the issues on GitHub, where we're pretty active these days. Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Can someone just unmute and tell me I'm not speaking to myself? Just because I got cut out earlier.
You're not speaking to yourself.
Great. Thank you. Cool. Anything else before we close this meeting? Anything at all? I'm considering organizing another workshop, maybe in Q1, maybe before or after ETH Denver. Just want to gauge the temperature on the value of doing that, and if people are going to be at ETH Denver already, and that makes any sense.
I have something, Danny.
Yeah.
In the Ethereum Magician Forum, so there is FOSDEM, which is the biggest free and open source software conference. It's on February 2. And they submitted a request for a dev room, and we will have a blockchain and decentralization dev room, I guess. So no, decentralized internet and privacy. So I guess we could have at least people at the Nimbus team will be there initially for NIM, but we can have others from Eth2.0 as well, and I guess we can get out of the Ethereum or even blockchain echo chamber, but still reach out to people with the same ideals as us.
Parody will be there as well. I think it's generally a good crowd.
Cool. I don't know if anyone from the research team is planning on going, but we can check it out. I suppose if enough people are going to be at that event, it might make sense, whether I'm there or not, to just get together maybe the day before and hack on some of these issues.
Yeah, and there is also a call for proposal if we want to do some kind of lightning talk. The deadline is on the 1st of November. I'll post the link to the Ethereum Magician discussion in the chat if I can get Zoom to work, because it's not.
Here, wait, you said the talks, the applications to speak are due when?
So basically, every room is organized by someone, and you can do lightning talks, like talk about something for 10 minutes, like this is the beacon chain, this is the VDF or something, and the organizer, I don't know who it is for the blockchain room, but the deadline is in 15 days for various talks proposal.
Okay, I see. Cool. Great. Anything else? Any comments, questions, concerns before we end this thing half an hour early today? That's awesome. Nope. Okay. Great. Thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate it being a little shorter. I'm in Tokyo and it's midnight. We will. I don't think there's anything conflicting with meeting in 2 weeks. That will be firmly after American Thanksgiving. Great. Be in the Gitter on the repos, etc. And I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Cheers.